Hey guys, for today's video, as you guys can see by the title down there, today we are talking about Skylar Neese. Before we get started, please don't forget to subscribe and the little button down there. And if you want to know a little bit more about this case, then just keep on watching. So today we're going to be talking about Skylar Neese. Now, when I was researching for this case, I really couldn't believe what I was reading. It was just so surprising to me how a couple of teenagers could have done something like this. Skylar Neese was murdered by her two best friends because they didn't like her. Skylar Neese was an only child to Dave and Mary Neese. Dave worked at the local Walmart and Mary worked at a local medical facility. According to Skylar's friends and family, Skylar was always very bubbly, she was very loyal, and she was just an overall very happy person. She had a job at Wendy's, and overall she was a good student as well. When Skylar was 8 years old, she met Sheila Eddy. It was an instant bond and they became best friends. From that day on, they would spend every day together and they were inseparable. Even Dave and Mary considered Sheila as part of their family. So although Dave and Mary did not agree on everything that Sheila would do, they would overlook because it was Skylar's best friend. During their freshman year, Skylar and Sheila met Rachel, and she was described as very charismatic, very popular, and talented. When they met Rachel, they became inseparable, all three of them. You could never find one of them alone. They just spent every minute that they were able to together. On July 5th, Skylar finished her shift at Wendy's and she headed home. When she got home, she said goodnight to her parents and headed to bed. Obviously, her parents didn't notice anything out of the ordinary and they said goodnight. So the next day, Dave, Skylar's dad, realizes that Skylar's door is still closed, and obviously he starts knocking and starts calling out her name. So when he opened the door, he was very surprised to find that the bed looked like nobody had slept on it the night before. He called Skylar's phone, but she didn't answer, so he decided to call Sheila and ask if, she had talked to her or knew where she was. Sheila said that she had talked to her the night before at around midnight. When Dave started looking around Skylar's bedroom to see if there was a clue or something, he noticed that the window was a little bit open, and he realizes that the screen was not there anymore. Skylar had a very good relationship with her parents, and obviously he was confused to find that the window was a little bit open, and obviously started thinking that she may had sneaked out during the night. The next day, Skylar had already a scheduled shift at Wendy's, and when she didn't show up, obviously the manager called Dave to ask if Skylar was going to come in because it was not like her to just skip a shift. This is where Mary and Dave decided to call 911 because it was very strange that she didn't show up for her shift and she wasn't answering phone calls from them. After calling 911, Mary got a phone call from Sheila. And Sheila said that she needed to talk to her. She needed to tell her the truth of what had happened the night before. So Sheila told Mary that Rachel, Skylar, and herself had snuck out the night before to drive around Star City to get high. Sheila then told Mary that the night before, Rachel and herself had dropped off Skylar around midnight, and that was the reason why she had spoken to her last night around midnight. Sheila then said that herself and Rachel dropped off Skylar at the end of the road. Skylar had said that she didn't want to wake up her parents and that she would just walk up the driveway. At this point, Mary remembers that there's actually surveillance at the apartment complex where they live, that she would actually be able to see what had happened to Skylar when she got dropped off. Now, the surveillance video shows that at 12:30 in the morning, 30 minutes after Sheila had said that they had dropped off Skylar, you can see Skylar walking out to the driveway and getting inside a car. And based on the surveillance video, because you can see that Obviously, Skylar got into the car voluntarily. Unfortunately, the police decided not to do an Amber Alert because she had left voluntarily. Just hours after Skylar's disappearance, Rachel is seen posing in pictures in her family's friend's boat, and she just seems like she doesn't have a care in the world, and she was just enjoying life. Sheila, on the other hand, is in constant communication with Skylar's parents, and she's helping them put up like missing persons posters, and she is tweeting about her disappearance, and she's asking Skylar to come back home through her Twitter. After a couple of days, Sheila asked Skylar's parents if she could go to their house and just sit on Skylar's bed. She was obviously very concerned about Skylar's disappearance. She seemed very, very worried, and Mary actually said that she came into the room and sat with her and kind of like spent time with her, and that she seemed extremely sad for her best friend's disappearance. Police started looking into bank activity or cell phone, if Skylar had used her cell phone, trying to like ping a location, but unfortunately there was no activity in either of those. Mary actually realized that Skylar's cell phone charger was still in her bedroom, and they thought, she realized that she wasn't going to take long and that she was going to come back, and that's why she didn't take the cell phone charger. Now here comes in Officer Colvin, and she was the officer that was assigned to this case and obviously to follow the investigation. And she actually went and interviewed Sheila, and she noticed that she was not showing any type of emotions in regards to Skylar's disappearance, and that she did seem a bit nervous when she was talking to her. Officer Colbank started interviewing people around the town and asking around kind of like about their group, about their friendship. She asked about Sheila, and people actually described Sheila as a very manipulative person, sneaky and shady. Some friends of Skylar actually mentioned that a couple of times Rachel and Sheila would come to school dressed almost kind of like in the same clothes, and that they would just say that it was a coincidence and they wouldn't tell Skylar. So that's where things started getting a little bit weird. People started noticing that Skylar may be a third wheel in Sheila and Rachel's friendship. In the weeks prior to Skylar's disappearance, on some Facebook posts, you could tell that she was very upset, and according to those messages, she was talking about someone in specific, and the messages said that she was very angry at them and that she did not trust them and that she was never going to trust them. Then the police found a video on Skylar's phone, and this video was actually kind of disturbing. The police realized that Sheila and Rachel obviously knew way more than they were saying. In the video, Sheila asks Rachel and Skylar how they would prefer to die. Now the police started looking into Skylar's and Rachel's messages, and this is a little bit strange, and this is where I do want to point out that this is where I get where people started saying that Skylar may be becoming the third wheel in their friendship group. Because when police started reviewing Rachel's and Sheila's messages, they realized that they were not mentioning Skylar. It seemed that Skylar just had disappeared. At this point, Dave and Mary obviously did not believe that Sheila and Rachel had anything to do with what had happened. They were actually telling police to leave them alone, that they were just, mourning the disappearance of one of their best friends. Sheila and Rachel had mentioned to the police that they had only drove around Star City that night. But obviously police started getting a little bit suspicious of them, and they started looking around businesses and their surveillance cameras, and this is where they realized that at 12:34 a.m. Sheila's car is seen driving north from Star City. This is where police obviously start getting a little bit more suspicious of them, because why did they lie? Why did they say that they had only stayed in Star City? There's actually surveillance that they had actually left Star City at 12:34 a.m. and that they had mentioned that they had dropped off Skylar at 12:30 at home. They looked at the cell phone records, and they also found that cell phone tower pins them in a town called Blacksville, 45 minutes from Star City. Now, when questioned, Sheila and Rachel say that they had actually forgotten that they had gone to Blacksville. Now this is where their stories begin to change, and you start seeing kind of that at the beginning they were just saying the same thing and they were sticking to a script. Sheila said that Skylar was not with them, but Rachel said that she was. Now Sheila actually was so convinced that her story was the right one and that she was telling the truth that she actually volunteers for a polygraph test, and she fails miserably at the test. Now Rachel was on her way to the test, but she was so scared of the test that she actually jumped out of her dad's car while moving, and she just flew. She did not want to take the test, and obviously that screams guilty. Now at this point, everybody in Morgantown started pressuring Sheila and Rachel to tell the truth, to just tell the police what had happened that night, because obviously they didn't have a body and they had no clue as to what had happened to Skylar. After 6 months of Skylar's disappearance, Rachel finally cracks and has a mental breakdown. And you can actually look up the 911 call where Rachel's mom is calling 911, and you can hear Rachel screaming in the background. And Rachel is now taken into a psychiatric hospital. Now the details of what happened at the hospital have never been released. After Rachel's release from the hospital, Rachel was actually driven to the police station. This is where everything kind of takes a turn, because what Rachel is about to tell the police is something that I don't think anybody would have expected. The first words out of Rachel's mouth at the police station were, "We stabbed her." Rachel started telling the police that one day during science class, herself and Sheila started planning how to kill Skylar. They planned how they were going to kill her and how they were going to dispose of the body. So on July 6th, Sheila and Rachel gathered all the tools that they needed. They had bleach, paper towels, wipes, and a change of clothes, and kitchen knives. Rachel tells them that the night that they had picked up Skylar at 12:30 a.m., they actually had the kitchen knives in their hoodies because they were all ready to go. That night, Sheila drove out of Star City and across state lines to Brave, Pennsylvania. They went into the woods and they found a spot where they sat down and started smoking. Skylar then gets up and walks towards the car to find a lighter. Rachel and Sheila now see their opportunity and start counting down. 1, 2, 3. And on 3, they attacked Skylar. Skylar actually started running from them, and Rachel tackled her and continued to stab her. Now, according to Rachel, Skylar was screaming. Why? They actually slit her throat because they had read that that was a faster way to die. The plan was to bury her body in the woods, but they realized that it was very hard to remove the dirt, and so they just decided to put her on the side of the road and cover her with rocks and leaves and just leave her body there. They changed into their new set of clothes and cleaned the car with the bleach so that there was no trace of blood. Police asked Rachel why they did this, and Rachel's response was just that they didn't like her. So unfortunately, because they had no body and no concrete evidence, they could not charge Rachel or Sheila. So they had to wait for Rachel to either say where the body was or find a way to incriminate Sheila. Now, when they took Sheila's car, they actually found blood. And so police decided to do a DNA test to see if it was Skylar's blood. Police needed that DNA confirmation in order to arrest Sheila. Meanwhile, Rachel continues to give details to the police and actually tells them where the body was. Skylar's body was found on January of 2013, more than 6 months after her disappearance. Now, after finding Skylar's body, the news break that, you know, they had found their body, but the identities of the murderers were not revealed at this point. So after it was announced that Skylar's body was found, Sheila started tweeting, and she said, "Rest easy, Skylar. You will always be my best friend." At the same time that she was pretending to mourn the death of her best friend, she tweeted, "We really did go on 3." And that was just a slap on the face to the police, because they had already had the details that Rachel had told them. And she had told them that, you know, she had counted down and that they did go on 3. Finally, FBI gets a break everybody was waiting for. And the DNA came back as positive for Skylar's blood. With enough evidence, police tracked Sheila, and she was actually having breakfast at a restaurant with her mom. And this is where they go and arrest her. The only thing that Rachel had said as the reason to why they had killed her was because they didn't like her. But police were not convinced that this was the only reason that they had decided to commit this. Police continued to investigate to find the real reason why they had decided to kill Skylar. So they told the police that he knew that Skylar knew more things about Rachel and Sheila that they wanted her to know. In Skylar's diary, she wrote that she had actually witnessed a sexual relation between Sheila and Rachel, and that was maybe one of the reasons that they had killed her. That maybe they were afraid that Skylar was gonna say something or tell anybody. But then Officer Colbang actually mentioned that they think that Rachel and Sheila just did it because they wanted to feel the thrill of it, and they wanted to see if they would actually be able to do it. A year and a half after Skylar's murder, Rachel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and based on her cooperation, she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Sheila pleaded not guilty at first, but then she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. After entering her plea, Sheila was sentenced with life in prison with mercy, which means that after turning 18, she would be eligible for parole after serving 15 years in prison. After this agreement, the kidnapping and the 2 counts of conspiracy were dropped. In memory of Skylar, Dave and Mary Neese passed the Skylar's Law in West Virginia. This law requires Amber Alerts on all missing children. So that is it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe in the little button down there. As always, the products that I use in this video are going to be linked down in the description box. And until then, I'll see you guys on my next one. Bye!